Hey everyone, Jeff Villeneuve here. Over the last few months, our team has been hosting in-person info sessions on how to invest in the CMHC MLI Select program. Due to popular demand, we finally did a virtual webinar, and this is a recording of it, hosted by our broker and the one tasked with sourcing our projects, Jake Steinman. Now, I know people have busy lives, so we tried to edit the recording to shorten it as much as possible. We also broke it down in chapters, that way you can see in the description, so you can jump back and forth as your timetable allows. And if you have or you ever think you will have an interest in investing in real estate, you owe it to yourself to give this a watch in its entirety. And don't worry, there's no sales pitch at the end, but if you do want to talk, my details will also be in the description. Ready? Let's get into it.
We're here today to talk about CMHC MLI Select, which in my opinion is the best place to invest in 2025, and we're going to talk a little bit about why that is. First off, I just want to talk about how much money has been put into this space this year. If you read the news, the MLI Select program is being utilized more and more than ever before in history. Across the country, for the last 3 years, it's been non-stop growing volume. Ourselves have been responsible for bringing to market over 550 units that are sold firm, equating to over $160 million in new apartment buildings that will get delivered throughout this year and through next year for the MLI Select program. So if you read all the reports coming out from TREB and other real estate boards over the last couple weeks, it would seem that the real estate market is dismal. We've seen that listings on MLS are up across the board, especially condos, townhomes, and even resale. Prices are coming down, nothing is selling. It's just bad news after bad news after bad news. So why would anyone want to invest in real estate in Canada, the world? Because we're hearing the same things coming out of Texas, out of Florida, all over the place, that it's just bad news out there. Well, then you also hear the news like how inflation is on the rise, and core inflation in April exceeded expectations, was higher than expected. So there's just more bad news out there. So if that's the case, why are people buying multifamily rental buildings? Why is it a good investment? Why is it the best place to put your money in 2025? And I would say that this German phrase, Fries oder Strib, explains it. What does it mean? It means sink or swim. Or you want to say it in another way, it means adapt or die. You have to be willing to change how you've been thinking and where you're placing your money and what you're trying to do. If you're not willing to adapt, and if you're not willing to look for opportunities where others say there is none, then you better be prepared to sink, right? And we see it. We see everyone running away from their condos, running away from their houses. We see agents leaving the market, going in other directions. And yet through all of that, somehow we had the best start to the year in terms of selling property that we've ever had, selling almost 600 units in the first half of 2025. That's 550 new unit rentals that are going to make our investors a lot of money. And that's because, in my opinion at least, it doesn't really matter if the market goes a little bit up or goes a little bit down, because there's really three things human beings need at the end of the day. The first thing is oxygen. That gets you about 60 seconds, right? If you can't breathe, you're dead. Second thing is food. And right behind that is shelter, the need for housing. Traditionally, residential rental has been one of the safest types of investments someone can make, because it does not matter. After you get your breath of air, after you buy your groceries, the next thing people are going to do is figure out a way to make rent at the end of the month, especially in a place like Alberta, where it can go to minus 30 and minus 40 in the winter. So whether markets go up or down over the short run does not really matter if you're buying well-positioned multifamily apartment buildings that are cash flow positive. The big reason that people have been losing money or not being able to sell their condos and their houses, and why they're now underwater on all of these residential level things, is because they've been thinking about it wrong. They've been buying at the retail level, not at the wholesale level. They've been buying the way that they were taught in elementary school, to save up a little bit of deposit, buy one or two little nest eggs, pay it down over time. But the unfortunate fact is, that's not how the big world of finance works, and that's not how you can actually generate long-term sustainable wealth and grow a portfolio of real estate that impacts your life. And that's what we're here to talk about today. I love this quote. 90% of all millionaires became so through owning real estate. More money has been made in real estate, all other industrial investments combined. The wise young man or wage earner of today invests his money in real estate. As I said, Andrew Carnegie, his name's all over downtown New York, one of the richest people on the planet in his day. How many of you guys in this room invest in real estate? And how many of you have made yourselves into millionaires through investment in real estate? Bless hands. less hands, right? And I think the reason, again, is because you've been trained. The system has trained you to make a nest egg, to save a little bit for retirement, to leave a condo for your kids if they go to university. It has not taught you how to leverage advanced financial techniques and government programs to rapidly grow a portfolio of cash flow positive housing. And that is what we're really talking about today. How to actually generate proper generational wealth using programs like CMHC MLI Select. So that's really why we're here. CMHC is the Canada Mortgage Housing Corporation. Everyone in this room should know that. But what is their actual purpose? Well, if you really boil it down, it's to encourage housing. It's to put affordable housing in the hands of Canadians. It's to make it so that every single Canadian, one way or another, can afford a home. And they kind of do that through a variety of things, but their core thing is to offer financing solutions, primarily through mortgage insurance, to make it easier for people to buy real estate. Now, most people know that from their residential lending side, right? Their personal lending. Everybody knows that when you're young and you need a little top up on your mortgage, you can't get to 80-20, or you're buying something a little bigger, that you go to CMHC, they insure your loan with the bank, and you're able to go to 90-10, or whatever you need to get that mortgage done. But what a lot of people don't know is about their commercial lending insurance. And they have a ton of it. Because at the end of the day, they're federally mandated to get more housing, more affordable housing in the hands of Canadians, and that includes rentals. There's a huge and growing number of Canadians. The population as a percentage of non-homeowners is growing, and they also want to ensure that affordable rentals exist. And they do that through commercial lending insurance to incentivize new apartment building construction. So what is MLI Select? They provide mortgage loan insurance, the MLI part, and Select means it's their fanciest and best program, just like when you buy hardwood flooring or nice steaks at the butcher shop. Multi-unit developments, and what they count as a multi-unit development is a building with 5 or more units. They will give you extremely favorable financing with tiered incentives depending on how much you give back to the community through sort of what they call social governance or social give back in the range of affordability, accessibility, and energy efficiency. Now, just to update on what this 5 units means, and it's an important point. Back in February, CMHC provided some clarity because previously they did not speak to the form factor of a building at all. As long as you were buying 5 self-contained units, they didn't care what the thing looked like. But now they've updated that it needs to basically be a single complete building, or if it's multiple structures, it has to be on a single lot. And if you want to boil that down, what they're saying is you can't do this with detached homes. So it can be blocks of townhouses, it could be multiple buildings on the same lot that are like mid-rises, that kind of thing. But they're basically saying you can't just buy 5 houses side by side and count that as a multifamily anymore. It is what it is. For several years we could. They decided that the optics on that weren't the best. So how does a project qualify for this program? It's pretty simple. Very simple chart. And I wouldn't say you need to take photos of this or try to memorize this. In fact, if you type in to Google CMHC MLI Select, the very first page that will come up is the CMHC website, which will have these charts. But the important thing to understand is that you get points for hitting certain levels of affordability, energy efficiency, and accessibility. So if you hit 10% affordable, you get 50 points. If you hit 25% affordable, you get 100 points, et cetera, et cetera. When you get these points from different categories, you add them all up, and you get different incentives depending on how many points you have. And this is what really matters. We are always typically aiming for 100 points because you're getting the best stuff. The single most important thing that they allow is 95% finance. As far as I am aware, there's very few other programs on the planet where you can build apartment buildings where you only need to have 5% in the deal. It gives you an incredible opportunity to rapidly expand your portfolio when you compare that deposit size to what you need to buy a single home or a condo or a townhouse. You're leveraged at 20 times with something like this. The second big element is that obviously if you're getting a very large loan at 95%, you're going to have to make sure you can make the thing cash flow reasonably. So they allow you to have your mortgage amortization up to 50 years. So what you end up having is a low deposit and a long time to pay it back to ensure that the rents in the building, after covering all its expenses, are able to cash flow. Now there's some other stuff on here which I'll briefly explain. The DCR, or what we call the DSCR, is your debt service coverage ratio. So we're going to get into this a little bit more in detail, but essentially this is how much the rents, the net operating income of the building, exceeds the carrying cost of the mortgage by. So to put it in very simple terms, if the mortgage was $100 per month, if you had a 1.1 ratio, that would mean that your income on the building is $110. It exceeds it by 10% or 1.1. This is important because when you get into commercial lending, it's not really about you, the borrower, it's about the building. Can the building support its expenses and its mortgage? So why does it say this here? Well, that's the minimum that they will allow you to have, right? And we're going to talk about that in a lot more detail. The other big things are these limited recourse and the replacement reserve, which are discretionary. And we're going to dig into them, but just keep them in the back of your mind for now. The most important stuff here is that you can get that 95% financing with up to 50-year loans. So how does the affordability work? You must include affordable housing in all CMHC MLIs. To clarify, accessibility is optional. Energy efficiency is optional, but you must take points from affordable because obviously of those three categories, especially in today's economic climate, affordable rentals is a very big hot button item for the government and for society right now. Affordability is calculated by CMHC based on the local market, and the more points you get in affordable, you also get a lower CMHC insurance premium, which is very important too because you obviously want to pay the least fees you possibly can. However, and I really hammer on this point, it's one of the number one questions I get from people when we have private discussions. By having affordable units in your building, it does not mean you're taking in less desirable tenants or you're building slums or creating problems for yourself. And I hear people use this incorrect term all the time. They say low-income housing. I want to make it very clear. If there's only one thing you remember from this entire seminar, it should be that affordability does not equal low-income housing. They're two completely different things. Low-income housing are government programs where they source low-income tenants and they place them for you. And that's the government paying the rent. Generally, you don't have control over who that tenant is, and whatever happens, happens. That's totally different. And there's benefits and there's negatives to that. Affordable homes, as I said, CMHC looks around the country. They look at what the average incomes are in different areas, and they calculate a cutoff rent. They do not speak to who your tenant is. They do not tell you who your tenant is. You still put that unit up on the open market. You advertise it. You do your credit checks. You decide who you want. You collect your deposits like normal. It just means that that particular unit needs to be rented at or below the number they calculate. That is it. They don't speak to how nice the unit is finished. They don't speak to how big the unit is. They don't speak to how many bedrooms it is. So what do? Well, when we're building a brand new building, it's very easy to design around that to minimize the impact on your cash flow. We build smaller units and we charge other fees. So what do I mean by that? Well, you're not going to make your affordable unit a 4-bedroom on the penthouse level with marble floors. It's going to be a unit that's in the basement. It's going to be a 1-bedroom or a studio that's facing the garbage suite, whatever it is. The other element is that CMHC affordability only speaks to the dwelling itself, does not speak to any auxiliary services on the property. Parking, lockers, bike storage, etc. You can charge whatever you want. So you can see kind of where I'm going with this. If normally you would charge $50 for an underground parking spot with your 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom units, on your 1-bedroom affordable, maybe that parking spot is $200 or $300. So you can make up the majority of that affordability through either just having a smaller unit where your actual rent per size of the unit, square foot, is the same, or the auxiliary services in the building are at an extra cost that maybe other units do not have to cover. And CMHC does not speak to that. They are fine. The energy efficiency requirements. Well, there's the building code, and then if you want to get points from energy efficiency, you go above the building code. And if you want to go back to the slide where it's discussed, 20% above code, 25, 40% above code, if you want to build a building with that, you simply hire an energy consultant, the same way you hire your architect, you hire your planner, you hire your mechanical engineer. They look at the spec of the building and they say, you're at 15% and you need to get to 20. The cheapest way to do that is to upgrade to this furnace, and it's an extra $3,000 or whatever it is. And essentially they can put together a package for you that would hit any of those 3 category levels, and then you can make business investment decision if that makes sense. Now, what you'll understand to come as we go through this is that for what we are talking about, and especially the projects we're talking about that are primarily out west, neither energy efficiency or accessibility play a large role. The exact same thing with accessibility. You get reductions for building above minimum code on the accessible side, building barrier-free units. And again, you can choose to take points from here and from energy efficiency. And again, you would just simply have a consultant hired on the project who would tell you what you need to do. For accessibility, it's very simple. It's things like having barrier-free showers. having barrier-free bathrooms in general. Simple things. However, again, it's not something you need to over-understand. We focus on affordable because it's easy for a non-builder or non-code consultant to understand that if you can rent it for X or Y or Z, it's just a price. These points, you hire a consultant and they will engineer a solution that costs you the least money to get the points from there if you need. But if you can read between the lines, CMHC only cares if you have affordable in the building. That's really what they care about, because that's really what impacts the majority of people, is to have some rental units that can be accessed at a reasonable rate in the market. Our focus is on affordable for different reasons. As much as I love to help society, and of the 550 units that we sold over the last 5 months, 140 of them are affordable, so we did help. But primarily because it works the best, especially in Alberta, which we're going to explain in detail. So what are those key benefits, just to go through it in a little more detail here? Number one, as we said, up to 50-year amortization, up to 95% loan-to-cost financing, which means as low as 5% down, below prime interest rates, and if you want, you can even lock in 10-year terms on that money. So when they sell Canada mortgage bonds, they sell 5-year bonds, they sell 10-year bonds. Depending on what the rates are at the time that you are financing a project, it might make more sense to pick the 5-year rate or the 10-year rate. When the rates are good, as they are decent right now, locking in that money for 10 years, usually a smart play. And the reason I explain that this way is, look at all the people that bought homes in the early 2020s, 2019, 2018, 2021 kind of range, and then they had to start refinancing those in 23, 24 when rates went up to like 7%. A lot of those guys bought those homes, 2% interest, 1.8% interest, then they got hit with 7% interest, and they were dying. All of a sudden their mortgages went from $3,000 a month to like $8,000 a month. And I know we're talking about personal property, but the point is, imagine if they had locked in that 2017 or 2018 rate for 10 years. They slept through that whole thing. And now rates are not as low as they were then, but they've certainly come back down. And also, over a 10-year period, you pay down so much principal that even if rates are higher at the end of your term, you could always refinance it, extend it out again to keep the payments reasonable. The fact is, when you're taking loans this large, having the 5 years, you're adding a little bit of gamble, because over 5 years, anything can happen. But over a 10-year period, you create what I call an ability to sleep really well at night. You're not worried. If it's cash flowing today, you have 10 more years that you're not worried about the rate and your interest payments going through the roof or anything like that. In 2020, MLI was doing 10-year terms at 1.8% interest. Those people are only halfway through their term. They skipped 7%. They skipped 4% that we're at now. They skipped all of that. They still have 5 more years of 1.8%. And I bet you at the time that they probably could have got 5 years for like 1.3%. And there's probably an itch in the back of their brain being like, ooh, 1.3, that's good stuff. But they probably got advised by their lender and everyone else, take the 1.8. Your cash flow goes down a little bit, but you're going to be laughing because there's no way interest rates will be this low for the next decade, right? And now they're thanking their lucky stars they took that 10-year term. So what does this mean? When you combine the low deposits, the extended amortization, and the extremely low interest rates, you end up with high returns and positive cash flow. And how is it possible that we always know we're going to have those high returns and the positive cash flow? Well, it's simple, because it's not a trust us bro. There's a third-party sanity check that has to go on to actually lend on these things. Actually, there's more than a third party. If you really dig into the details, there's like 20 people who have to look at these files to get them approved. But essentially, at the end of the day, before any lending is approved, CMHC has to conduct its own analysis and decide what your cash flows are. They have to look at the rents you're projecting, look at what the expenses you're projecting are, see if they match what they have in their book, or if you can provide comps that are current reasonable comps in the neighborhood that show similar rents, similar expenses, and they are only going to qualify you for that 110%, 1.1 or higher debt service coverage. That's the bare minimum. That means that in the worst case scenario, the day you take possession of your shiny new building and lease it up in full, you should be covering 110% of your mortgage after paying off all your expenses, which means every single month you should be putting 10% more in the bank than it actually costs you. And we'll get into pro formas and reviewing cash flows in a bit. And just to be clear, that's not just, oh, I get this rent and I pay my mortgage. That's all proper expenses accounted for to get to that. Now, we generally look for projects that are at least 115 or higher. A lot of our projects sit even around 120 or higher. The reason is because, again, same reason I like 10-year loans, peace of mind, sleeping well at night. If you have that extra fat in the deal, then that means if the market changes, if conditions change, there's an extra safety net there for you. Because people love to talk about the best market and the good markets and low vacancies and rents going up. But if you're owning buildings for the long run, there will be years where the market goes bad. It's not reasonable to think markets only go up. Things go up, things go down, but over the long run, they typically go up. You just have to be able to survive those challenging years. And if you have a nice high debt service coverage, that means you have a ton of fat there for the years when rents go down or vacancies go up, which happens. So with this program, you get to leverage government-backed financing to maximize your investment. You get to actually start to build real wealth. You get to buy multiplexes, 5 units, 10 units, 20 units, hundreds of units, versus taking the same size deposit and buying one single family home or one condo. So I always say to people, why would you want to swim upstream when you can work with the current, right? Why work against government programs designed to help investors make money? So the question then becomes, if it's so beautiful, if it's so easy, why isn't everybody doing it? And the answer is, like most things that the government does, they come up with a good idea, but they manage to screw it up a little bit. And the way that they screw it up is that they never really thought about who wants to be a landlord. And what do I mean by that? Well, what they thought about is who wants to be a builder, right? They thought about people who want to finance construction of new buildings. But being a builder is really hard work. Being a landlord, not saying it's easy, but compared to being a builder, it's a pretty easy job. If your building's running well, if it's property managed well, what are you really doing on a monthly basis with your building? Maybe you're checking with your property manager once a week, see if there's any issues, if there's any repairs, what's going on with that one tenant who's a bit of a trouble causer, that kind of thing. But being a builder is a much higher barrier to entry. You have to first of all find land. That on its own is scary because we have 3 levels of government in this country. CMHC is a federal organization, and the requirements they have for affordable, energy efficiency, accessibility, those come down from the top. But what you can do with a piece of land comes up from the bottom. The way that the municipality might want you to build out your land might not match up with what the federal government wants. And if that gets screwed up, well, now you have a useless piece of land. So you have to actually get that land approved. You have to get the designs and the site plan entitled and improved by the city. Then you have to apply to CMHC and make sure it actually works with the costs and the financing. Then, if you're lucky enough to do that, you have to build it on time and on budget. You have to make sure that the contractors don't rip you off, the suppliers don't rip you off, which if you're not a builder, they will. Then you have to lease it up, manage it on an ongoing basis. It's a lot of work if you just want to be a landlord. It's a lot of risk if you just want to be a landlord. We all know building is a very risky activity. So the problem is, and the reason not everyone uses this program, is because the way CMHC initially designed it was for you guys to go out, find a piece of land, hire a contractor, hire an architect, planner, all these things, hopefully get it approved. By the way, they won't finance your raw land, so you have to pay for your raw land in cash, or maybe use regular financing, 10, 11% interest. And then if you get it all approved, you're lucky enough to actually still have money left to build it and then rent it out. And that kind of sucks. And that's why a lot of people don't use it. So what we kind of came up with, we've partnered with builders out in Alberta and some in Ontario that already have done all of this stuff. And we work with the commercial underwriters, the commercial appraisers, and the lenders to ensure that what we're designing out there is not only compatible with what the municipality wants, but also gets the maximum juice out of the CMHC financing available, as in building the appropriate form factor with the appropriate unit type, bicycle storage, etc., so that on that form factor we can maximize the rent with the minimum losses from the social responsibility we have to give back. And then we get the builder to agree to a fixed price contract and a fixed price timeline. And then we get you the property management, the lawyers, everyone you need, so that it becomes a completely turnkey, headache-free way of investing in a brand new multifamily building. And that's really where we think, at least, we've kind of bridged this gap, because we've separated the issue of who wants to be a builder from who wants to be a landlord. So it means whether that builder makes $1 or $1 million or loses $200,000 building your building, it does not matter. It's not your problem, it's the builder's problem. Every project we have already has site plan approval in hand, ready for building permits, shovel ready. So you're not worried about fighting the municipality and seeing if you get approvals, or you thought you were going to get a 9,000 square foot building and they just cut it down to 7,000 square feet. You thought you were getting 4 stories, now you're getting 2. None of those issues. And in terms of will it work with CMHC, we've already run it through the underwriters and the lenders and the appraisers to ensure that it's exactly what they want and that the numbers will work in the marketplace, so that all you have to do, walk into the shiny sales center, choose the one you like, and essentially proceed. And then on the other end, when it's ready for occupancy, have competent property management that we've recommended, lease it up and stabilize the asset for you so that you're not taking calls from tenants at 2 in the morning over a broken dishwasher. And that's kind of what's changed, and that's how we've been able to help people move on from buying single units to actually taking it to that next step. So how does someone qualify for this program? And this is why I say that a lot of people have thought about investment wrong for their whole lives because they think, oh, I can only afford a single family home or a condo or a townhouse. I don't make enough money. When you get into commercial lending, they don't care how much money you make. We have done multiple transactions where the buyer's income is zero. Retirees, people that own businesses and haven't taken a salary or a dividend, they do not care how much money you make because you have that debt service coverage we discussed that has to be at least 110. They care how much money the building makes. The building is paying the mortgage, not you. All they want to know is, do you have the deposits and do you have enough net worth and liquidity to back up the loan to keep you in line? Unfortunately, unlike the United States, we don't have no recourse loans. We have limited recourse loans, which I'll explain, but they want to know that at least you're not just putting the deposit and if you screw it all up, walking away and throwing the keys to the bank, right? So they want you to have something behind you, but it does not matter if you make $1, $1 million, or $0. I'll tell you, this is a true story. I just bought a 24 unit in Edmonton. Total purchase price $6.8 million. CMHC and lender mandate, no problem. I also just refinanced my condo in Toronto that I live in. The loan is only $270,000 and I almost couldn't get that approved. It took me less work and faster timeline to get a $6.8 million loan approved on a 24 unit building than it did to get my $270,000 loan that I've owned the condo 12 years and never missed a payment refinanced. Why? Because they don't even give a shit what my personal income is. No one cares about what your personal income is. So not only is this great because it allows you to scale, because if your personal income mattered, you could never buy 20 of these or 30 of these no matter what, but it's perfectly suited to business owners. Most business owners I know obviously try to minimize their personal income and keep as much as they can within corporations to minimize their tax load, right? So by having money within corporations, minimizing your personal income, it can be very hard for business owners to invest. All the time I would hear, I can't buy this condo or this house, can't show enough money. When you get into commercial financing, none of that matters. What you need to be able to show is a net worth of 25% of the project value. And of that net worth, you need to show between 10 and 20%, depends on the type of loan, in liquid assets. So to very briefly explain what those are, liquid assets are things you can turn into money the same day. So obviously cash is a liquid asset, gold, stocks, bonds, lines of credit, things like that. Now CMHC is kind of old school. They're really traditionalists, right? So they're not counting crypto, unfortunately, although we do have solutions for that where we can get net worth shown against your crypto. Your net worth is anything you own minus anything you owe. So if you have $1 million house, $500,000 mortgage, you have a $500,000 net worth. That being said, again, CMHC is traditionalist. So they're looking at your stocks, bonds, cash, houses that you own. You have a nice collection of Ferraris, they're not really going to count. Even if it's worth $1 million, it's more because they don't want to have to sell your Ferraris if they had to and figure out how to deal with that, right? So they're very traditional, just like any other mortgage. But the important element is they only count Canadian assets for this. So even if you have $100 million sitting in a bank account across the border in Detroit, it's basically zero to them. But if you can wire it over to a Canadian account, that's fine. So they just want to see that it's in Canadian bank accounts, in Canadian property, that kind of thing. Because it's very hard for them to have any sort of recourse to a foreign banking system. As well with that, you must either be a Canadian citizen or a PR to use this program. It's not available to international purchasers. However, they could be a minor shareholder in a corporate structure. So there's always ways to make it work. The key takeaway is it is 100% equity based and your income doesn't matter, and that's what really is the thing that sets it apart from personal lending. Now, the other fact about it that's also important is even high income individuals, starting about 4 or 5 years ago, started to get really hard to get more than like 4 or 5 mortgages. And even if you're like a Toronto Raptor who makes $20 million a year, the bank really doesn't want to give you more than 5 or 6 loans because they just see so much risk in it. This big news story, I think in like 2021 or 2022. Commercial lending does not work the same way. That's how people become massive landlords and end up owning hundreds to thousands of doors. Whether you do one CMHC commercial loan or 500, they do not care. As long as you meet the requirements, as long as the properties can cash flow. That's all they care about. And in fact, there is no way for someone to even search that you have a loan because it's against the property and the corporation that you're holding that property in. This does not show up on your credit score. You could buy a $20 million apartment building today and tomorrow go out and buy a $2 million house to live in And when the bank runs your credit, they won't even know that that loan exists. Because it's not against you, it's against the property. That's the big thing people don't really understand when you move into commercial. And that's kind of where I get to when I say the people have been taught wrong their whole lives. It's actually easier to buy a 5-plex than it is to buy one little investment condo. Because as long as you have the deposits and you have the liquidity and the net worth, nothing else really matters. Your credit doesn't even have to be good. CMHC's off-the-shelf minimum is 630. I don't know if you know a lot about credit scores, but 630 is pretty bad. So you can get a $20 million apartment building with a 630 credit score. And even if you're lower than that, they'll look at it if you have a reason why. Because they don't care about your personal credit. The only reason they worry if your credit's low is because they think maybe you're just kind of an irresponsible person. They're like, how can anyone have such a low score? You're not paying your bills. But if you have the net worth, you have the equity, they do not care. And that's the massive, massive advantage of commercial lending that no one gets taught in school. They teach you how to cook food and how to take care of a pretend baby. They don't teach you about this in high school. So what's the summary of it? Government-backed loan program, up to 95% financing, up to 50-year amortization, up to 10-year terms, the lowest interest rates you'll find anywhere on the planet, and basically a bunch of separate people sanity checking that these files actually are cash flow positive. Not just the commercial underwriter, the commercial broker, the lender themselves, and CMHC. And you have fixed price construction, which is usually your biggest risk on something like this, meaning that cost overruns, time delays are the builder's problem, not you as the buyer. So how can you lose? But there's more to this program. And this is the part that's really the wealth construction element of this, the part that actually allows people to get substantially wealthy. It's pari passu lending. So people are like, what the hell is that? Well, it's a Latin phrase that means side by side, at the same rate, equal footing, however you want to kind of explain it. But what it means in the context of CMHC is that the lending of a second loan is treated as equal footing with the first loan. So that means that you can get a second CMHC loan on a property behind the first loan based off of the property appreciating and appraising higher in the future, but it's treated like a first loan. It's the interest, the terms, everything else is treated like your first CMHC loan, which means that in the future you can pull out your initial 5% investment and potentially more, assuming that the property prices have appreciated and the appraisal can show higher. So how do people go from nothing to 100 doors over 10 years? This is how. Whether it's with CMHC or even with traditional commercial financing, this is how people build portfolios and build generational wealth. Nobody earns enough money other than a few professional athletes to ever acquire hundreds of units through salary alone. They acquire them through refinancing the properties they have because the cash flows can support a bigger loan. And this is what I mean by you get taught wrong from a young age, because most people are taught pay down your mortgage, pay down your mortgage, pay down your mortgage. Paying down your mortgage, basically the worst thing you can ever do in life, unless it just makes you feel really good. All you're doing is tying up equity in a property that's not generating any value for you. When you have, especially when you have attractive financing like this, you want to maximize your usage of it by extracting as much capital from that financing as possible. Obviously, you don't want to go out and buy a bunch of Ferraris or buy something stupid with it or go to Vegas for the weekend. You want to take out that money to go and buy more real estate. Now, I posted in one of our group chats about 2 weeks ago a screenshot of a guy who just bought 128 units CMHC with us. He started 3.5 years ago and he has 600 units now. And he literally gave me his story. He did his a little differently. He actually bought a piece of land, severed it into 2 homes, built custom homes, sold them, used that money to build a 20-unit building, sold that, refinanced that, went out and bought a 100-unit building. 3 years later, he has 600 units by using pari passu financing to get the money out. Now, I think that's an extreme example. I don't expect most people are going to go from 0 to 600 units in 3 years. He also rode a good time in the market and a lot of other things that helped him. But if someone on the extreme example of luck and strategy can get from 0 to 600 units in 3 years, then anyone who can buy a 6 or 8 or 10 plex today should have no problem getting to 50 or 100 units over a decade. In fact, that's not even if you're focused and you're buying the right properties, that's not even a if, it's a when situation. And that's what I'm doing. That's why I'm buying as many of these as I can. But the way you get there is by buying one that makes sense, that has high cash flow, letting it appreciate a little bit, pulling that equity out, using it to buy another, letting it appreciate, use it to buy another. And as that portfolio continues to grow, don't forget that the first one that you already refinanced is going to keep appreciating over time too. You have a bigger and bigger portfolio of assets that you can keep pulling equity from to buy more. And the only thing that stops you from having 500 or 1,000 or whatever number you want is how aggressive you are and how much risk you're willing to take on. Because the more real estate you have, the better your life kind of gets, and not everyone needs to have 10,000 units. You know what I mean? 100, even 20 or 30 units. My 24-plex is going to be at about $65,000, $70,000 cash flow after I pull out my deposits from it. So for a lot of people, that's already a life-changing passive additional amount of money per year. But if you repeat that 3 or 4 times, get to 100 doors, you're talking about $200,000-$300,000 in passive income alone from 100 units. That's already more money than the average Canadian will ever make in their life, and that's money that comes in no matter what, whether you're asleep, whether you're awake, whether you show up at the property or not. Even if you run the property like shit and leave vacancies and don't repair things, you'll still be close to that number. For a lot of people to say, screw it, I've got my 50 or 100 units, I'm making a couple $100K on the side, I'm good. For a select few, they have that need to get to 500, 1,000, whatever it is. But the point of what I'm really trying to say here is, if you sit in Toronto and buy one condo, one townhouse, one detached home, put a legal basement, you will never build that portfolio. There is no mathematical way, even in the luckiest, best market, that over 20 years that's going to turn into hundreds of units unless you are a Toronto Raptor who makes unbelievable excess money. But any average guy who's saved up enough and has the net worth can easily build a portfolio of 50 or 100 units within a decade. And that is life-changing money. That is generational wealth that your children can continue to grow into thousands of units if you want. And I can give you example after example. You know, that guy's new in the game. He's at 3 years. Another example, and I bring him up all the time, he's a family friend of ours. He lives in Niagara region. Came here in the 70s, Italian immigrant, grade 7 education, barely could speak English, started working here as a concrete former, bought a little apartment building that was in terrible condition, used his knowledge of construction to fix it up, pull out the equity, refinance. That was back in the late 70s. Today he's worth $2.1 billion. He owns about half of Niagara Falls and half of Sudbury. You can Google him, Panoramic Properties, Angelo Butera. He came here as a grade 7 level, barely speaking English immigrant, and he refinanced properties to $2 billion net worth as of today. So again, you can take these things as far as you want or not as far as you want. And he didn't get handed, he came here with $1 in his pocket. He didn't get handed anything. He didn't have an MBA. He didn't make millions of dollars in his day job. He simply leveraged refinancing to pull that equity. But again, not everyone needs to be a billionaire. Not everyone needs 600 units. But the point is, it is extremely attainable using this program to get to 50 or 100 doors over a decade. And even if it took you 2 decades, it's still exponentially more than you would ever get from buying individual homes or condo. You can end up owning your apartment buildings with $0 down within sometimes right at closing and sometimes a couple years after. And part of that is whether you get lucky or unlucky with the market, right? It's like playing games with cheat codes on. Because if you can, like, there's no way in a normal building where you'd have to put 20 or 25% down, you would ever recover your deposits within a year or two. If you get lucky, if the market goes up, if rents go up, you pull them out right away. If you get unlucky and the market stays flat, oh no, you have a cash flow positive building for 3 or 4 years that you only put 5% in. And then you pull it out and buy another one when the market's up and you've paid off some of that principal. It's like playing the game with cheat codes on, and every big landlord in this country uses CMHC on the billion-dollar scale, and that's how they built their portfolio. So let's talk about why it works so well with Alberta. First of all, we have the Alberta advantage. And as much as I would love to say I made this cool term up, it's actually the provincial ethos of Alberta. So about a decade ago, they recognized the writing was on the wall and that eventually oil would not be that important. Now, a lot of people would have you think we're all going to be driving electric cars in a year or two. Obviously, I think oil is going to be important probably till 2050, 2060. However, as a share of the global economy, the writing for oil is on the wall. Over the long run, it will become less and less of the global GDP, and that means that Alberta, if they didn't make any changes, would go from being the richest province to probably not. So what they have done over the last decade is they've tried to, and I know it sounds very cliche, but they've been working to attract private sector by reducing red tape and making it easy to do business there. And that has worked to diversify their economy. In fact, Edmonton has had a 53.5% increase in technology companies as a share of its GDP over the last 5 years. And recently, as November, I believe it was announced, the world's largest data center will be built in northern Edmonton. $70 billion AI data center will be built in Alberta, just north of Edmonton. And that is the largest one in the world. Kevin O'Leary's part of it. It's a firm deal. It's happening. Couple reasons why. Number one, it's easy to do business there. They didn't make it take 20 years to get their building permits. They didn't have to do a bunch of studies and committees and other things. They also have the lowest corporate tax rate in the country. They make it easy to do business. They also have cheap energy. Running a giant data center takes a lot of energy. And this one's kind of not Alberta specific, you could say, but it's cold a lot of the year and you need a lot of cooling. You need cold air to cool data centers. So overall, they were selected, and I think that's a really cool story because, you know, obviously there's data centers everywhere, but when you think of like world-leading data centers, you probably think of like Japan or Taiwan or maybe Dallas or something like that. You don't think Alberta, Edmonton is going to be the spot. And this will employ nearly 10,000 people in high-paying jobs. Obviously, the population is almost 6 million people. That's not going to move the needle, but it's more of a metaphor, a story for a province that is attracting big investment from the tech sector. There's also huge housing demand. The population of Alberta grew by over 4% in the last year. It's the highest growth rate in Canada, and within the actual cities of Calgary and Edmonton, it was closer to 5%. What's really interesting about it is that it's internal migration. So when new immigrants come to Canada, for the most part, they come here, Toronto, they come to Vancouver, they go to Montreal, because those are the big cities. Those are the places people know about. That's where people land. What's interesting about what's happening in Alberta is it's internal migration. It's people leaving Toronto, leaving Vancouver, leaving Montreal, and moving there. And there's a few reasons why people are moving there. The primary reason is, and I know this is a weird thing to say, but I believe that it's really the only place left in Canada where the Canadian dream still exists, in that a reasonable job can get you a nice quality of life and living at an affordable rate. What do I mean by that? How much does a house cost in Toronto? $2 million? And if you want to buy a house in Toronto proper, 4 walls touching air, in a decent neighborhood, entry price has got to be around $2 million for something you actually want to live in. You can buy a detached house in Edmonton for $500,000. You can buy a detached house in Calgary for $600,000. That means a person who makes 80, 90, 100K a year, a reasonable salary for a young professional, 30 years old, 27 years old, if they have a mobile job, they can pick a studio in Toronto, or they can pick a detached house with a backyard, a front yard, and a garage. Where are people going to move? Well, the market has proven it. They're all moving to somewhere where they can afford those things and have the quality of life that Canada promised people a generation ago, that you can no longer get in Toronto. And along with those moving to buy a house, you have the exact same thing with people moving for rental. In fact, the average Albertan has $1,000 more at the end of the month in their pocket than the average person in Ontario after paying all of their bills. That's discretionary spending money. That is a massive gap when you're talking about averages. We're not talking about wealthy people, we're talking about average Canadians. $1,000 more at the end of the month, and it's only getting worse because of inflation here and other things. And what's really interesting is that in Edmonton specifically, the housing starts were actually down in February year over year by 24%. So what you have when you combine massive population growth with less housing being built is literally solid gold. And that's what makes Alberta so attractive, is that you have extreme demand for housing, and especially in Edmonton, very low vacancy rates, with that migration combined with the lack of housing being built. But there's actually more to it that makes Edmonton and Calgary so attractive. So back to that affordable index that we were talking about earlier. The median renter income in Edmonton and Calgary is very high. Affordable rents are calculated off of what those incomes are. So Edmonton's affordable rent is $1,665 per month, and Calgary's is $1,740 per month. To put it in perspective, many areas of Ontario are as low as $1,000 per month. So imagine, and there's not many areas in Ontario where like a one-bedroom would rent for less than $1,500 or $1,600, even if you go to the furthest outskirts. So imagine if you had to take the crappiest, even the smallest basement rental, and you could only rent it for $1,038 or $1,040 per month, when the market was $1,600 or $1,700. It absolutely crushes your cash flow. But when you have an index in Alberta at almost $1,700 a month, well, a one-bedroom basement unit in Edmonton only rents on the open market for $1,200 to $1,300. A two-bedroom only rents for $1,300 to $1,500. So that means you literally have no penalty when you design your building right to taking your points from the affordability. People don't understand how big of a deal this is. Imagine if you built the same building in Toronto and you had to take a haircut on 25% of your units by $600 a month each. Versus here, you're not even hitting the maximum affordable if you engineer your building properly, meaning you are full market on every single unit with headroom if the rents go up in the marketplace. I mean, if you're renting a 2-bedroom for $1,500 and it's $1,665, that means rents could go up $165 before you're even hitting that cap. And these get indexed with inflation, of course, as well. Beyond that, your delivery costs in Alberta of the actual product are substantially lower. They do not have land transfer tax. They do not have development charges. They do not have municipal fees, hookups, parkland dedication. 30 to 40% of the cost of a new home in Ontario is taxes and fees. Does anyone know how many fees, what is an absolute dollar value you pay on a 1-bedroom condo in Toronto in development charges, municipals, and other things? Take a guess. The total taxes and fees on a new condo in Toronto end up being around $150,000. Think about that. On a 1-bedroom condo, when you add it all up, you end up sitting around $150,000 in nothingness when you think about it. As I like to say, I cannot rent a fee. I can only rent hard square footage at the end of the day. 90% of your cost in Alberta is going to building the building. In Toronto, in Ontario, 60 to 70% is going to building the building. You know how much of a disadvantage that gives you if you're trying to make the deal paper? Not just that, we didn't really get into this level of detail, but the average planning approval time in Alberta is substantially faster. Most of our projects, if you wanted to know on the builder's end, they're getting their approvals from raw land 90 to 120 days. Whereas in Ontario, it could take years to get approvals. RioCan once estimated, and this is just one builder, so I can't speak for all of them, that every single month they wait at the City of Toronto for a building approval is $6 per square foot of costs, because they obviously have a machine, they have financing costs, they have all these things sitting there costing money. If the average planning approval in Toronto takes 30 months, that's $180 per square foot of cost just created out of bureaucracy for no reason. $180 per square foot. On a 500 square foot unit, that's give or take $90,000 added to the cost of delivery for no reason in Toronto. In Alberta, 60, 90, 120 days, projects are approved. So you're paying, the builder is carrying the land for less. They don't have to hire as many expensive consultants to argue over things that don't matter. And then the buyer and the builder don't have to pay the land transfer tax. And just so you know, land transfer tax is double, because the builder has to pay land transfer tax when they buy the raw land. And then you, the buyer, have to pay the land transfer tax when you buy the finished product. So the city's clipping 2 land transfer taxes. And then if you're in Toronto, it's a double land transfer tax. You pay 4 land transfer taxes when you buy a new condo in Toronto. None of that exists in Alberta. And then the best part, there is no rent control in Alberta. There is security deposits in Alberta. You can charge auxiliary fees and enforce other contract terms. So if someone brings a pet into your building, you can actually evict them for it. Or you can charge them additional fees for having a pet. Both of those are illegal in Ontario. If you write something into the contract, as long as it's legal, it's binding. Whereas in Ontario, if you basically at all deviate from the standard lease, it's just thrown out at the landlord-tenant board. A lease in Alberta, I'm not saying it's exactly like a commercial lease, but it's much more contractual. Whatever you write in there is essentially binding. And then here's the best part. You can evict a tenant for not paying rent in 14 days. How many people here have a tenant in Ontario that's been sitting, not paying their rent for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 months? I have one that's getting evicted July 15th, $14,500 they owe, Victoria Park in Eglinton. I hear horror stories every day. I was just talking to one of my agents, $40,000 in unpaid rent from a unit. You heard the story, I think it was in the news a couple months ago, that lady bought a house and was living in her car because the tenant wouldn't leave. None of that exists in Alberta. And in fact, even if they appeal it, it's heard and decided on within the month. And the only valid reason for an appeal is that they actually did pay their rent and the landlord is lying. There's no sob stories. There's no payment plans. There's no any of that stuff. There's no, oh, I need to stay. There's no gamification of the system. It's very simple. It's like America. Pay your rent or get out of my house. But they're very serious about enforcement. Here's the craziest part. Who would have thought most people pay their rent? Because there's actually consequences to not paying your rent, unlike Ontario. And it's a big thing because, you know, when we look at cash flow analysis and everything, people put bad debt and vacancy, and depending on the region, it might be 3%, 4%, 5%. But if you own a 10-unit building and one tenant doesn't pay you for a year, that's 10% bad debt and vacancy. If it's an 8-plex, that's like 12% bad debt and vacancy. A 5-plex, it's 20% of your building is not paying rent. Yet in most places in Ontario, if you look at a cash flow analysis, they put 3 or 4%. And it only takes one bad tenant and they can destroy your entire year's earning. Whereas in Alberta, the maximum you're going to get clipped is a month. And realistically, since you're carrying a security deposit in last month's rent, you should be fully covered within that period. You're not going to end up with a $20,000 or $30,000 bill that's unaccounted for. I love harping on this point because I too suffer this problem in Ontario, and it keeps me awake at night. You know, I'm literally selling my buildings in Ontario because I don't want to deal with this anymore. They're both cash flowing. If anyone wants to buy them, can buy them. I just don't want this risk in Ontario. None of it exists in Alberta. So it's a magic formula. You have strict laws enforcing tenancy. You have low delivery costs for construction of new buildings. You have favorable financing terms that line up with the affordable indexes and everything else. And what it means is that you end up with stable, high cash flows with minimal deposits in the deal. And that's why I think so many Canadians are A, moving to Alberta, and be investing in Alberta. CMHC and Alberta just work so well together. It's really unbelievable. So how long will this last? I mean, we have no idea. And this is not a sales pitch, it's just food for thought. Policies are tightening all the time with CMHC. It's almost like they don't want people to make too much money because all the time they see people doing too well, building too many buildings, they add new rules, they add new policies. And I'm not saying they're killing the program. I'm just saying that the good times will never be as good, in my opinion, as they are now. I already heard that they're going to be making a minor change in June. I don't think it's a big deal overall, but it's just another example of them making it slightly more challenging, slightly raising construction costs on these buildings, which again makes it harder to deliver cheap product easily. We also have potential rate increases coming over the short time because we have inflation risk. We have tariffs from the United States. We've had some pretty low rates over over the spring, and now I've seen rates come up about 25 basis points. The bonds have gone up from about 2.7 up to nearly 3 today. Will they keep going up? I don't know. All I can say is that rates are still pretty low, but we don't know where they might go over the short term. And finally, as more and more people are investing in Edmonton and Calgary, land prices are going up. That one's outside of anyone's control. That's simple market forces. Sellers of land see people want to buy it and they're raising the price. That means that how long will these really good opportunities exist? I don't know. But I can tell you the deals that we had 6 months ago on aggregate are probably better than the deals we have today. However, the deals we have today are probably better in aggregate than the deals we'll have 6 months in the future. Because as more people want to invest there, the prices of land go up, the prices of construction go up, and even the greedy municipalities say, hey, maybe let's add a land transfer tax. Let's add this, let's add that. Because when people see people making money, they all want to get their hands in the pie. It's a story as old as time. We already saw, for example, framers a year ago in Edmonton were charging $7 per square foot. Now they're on average charging $14 per square foot. So they've doubled the cost per square foot of framing in a single year. Why? Because they see everyone wants to build an 8-plex. So today it works. Tomorrow it may not. If this is the kind of investing you want to do, it's not the kind of thing you want to wait. It's the kind of thing where you want to do your research, determine it's for you, and enter the market while it still exists. Because as I said, it's already harder to do it now than it was 6 months ago, and I doubt the deals will be as good 6 months from now. So you can sink or swim, can adapt or die. We have chosen to adapt, both as a brokerage and what we offer, and as investors myself and many of my team, all buying these because I believe this is the best path to wealth, and I think it's also, if you're making money, you have to put it somewhere. And I think this is the way to swim. I also think, and this is new since the last time I did this presentation, the Liberals won the election. Liberal policies are going to inflate housing prices further than conservative policies would. They will continue with higher immigration levels. They will continue, we already heard they want to inject $24 billion into a new housing fund. All of these policies are expansionary, inflationary. High deficits, inflationary, which means sitting in cash positions is extremely risky. If you sit on cash, over the last 3 years, your cash is devalued 15%. So it might feel nice looking at $100,000 sitting in your bank account, but in 2022 dollars, it's $85,000 today. And that's if you believe kind of the official bank numbers, really. But I mean, I don't see that when I go to the grocery store and look at a price of a steak right now. I think it's a lot more core inflation. The point is, in inflationary times, you need your money in assets. The question is not whether to invest in assets. The question is what assets make the most sense. I personally believe that especially with the liberal policies that are going to be extremely housing inflationary, owning real estate is the right way to go. And I would rather have my money in cash flow positive assets that can weather intermittent changes in market conditions over trying to invest in more speculative condos in this market. That's why my money is swimming with CMHC. So we can look at an example of one of our projects here, and I always, when we do these, change the slide with kind of the latest and greatest stuff we're working on. We have different projects all the time. This is an 8-plex in Granville. Granville is a southwest suburb of Edmonton. It's a really nice little neighborhood. Very sought after neighborhood. We've already sold several 8s here. So this is a master plan. Typically we have 2 types of product. We have infill sites and we kind of have overall subdivision sites. We have probably 70-80% infill, 20-30% subdivision. So the big difference for those who may not know the technical terms, infill is an established neighborhood. There's a lot or 2 for sale and a builder's going to build on that lot. It would be like building something at Yonge and Lawrence or Yonge and Finch. You already have a fully built out neighborhood around you. Subdivision construction, it's a brand new plot of land where they're going to be building potentially hundreds of homes, you know, some commercial, some detached, some mid-rise, that kind of. This community is going to be about 200 homes when it's all said and done. The surrounding environment is quite built out already. There's literally a mall across the street. There's a highway right there. It's like 15 minutes to the airport. What's unique about this is a 3-story town product. So we actually do it a little bit different than most of our sites. A 2-story town, you have 2 levels above grade and a basement. A 3-story town, you have 3 levels above grade and a basement. In a 2-story town, we typically do a 2-level upper suite. So your main floor is like your living, your upper levels, your bedrooms, and then you put your small basement suite. In a 3-story town, we actually split it differently. We do an upper unit that's 2 levels, and we do the main floor and basement as a unit. The advantage of that is that you don't have a unit that you actually have to market as a basement suite. Because since your living is on the main floor and your bedrooms are in the basement, your living space is on a main floor, we can market it as a main floor suite. And the rents are nearly the same as an upper type unit. A lot of people actually like having their basement bedrooms because they're quiet, they're dark, they're cool. And since your living space is still above grade, you don't have this like sad I'm living in a basement feeling. Regardless, the big advantage is you get huge cash flow out of that second suite, nearly the same as your upper, 23 and 2200. The disadvantage is, in this case, we don't have a small affordable unit, so we do have to take a hit on one unit. This normally could rent for 2200, it's only 1665. So in this very unique case, we actually take less points and go with a 45-year mortgage instead of a 50-year. Because if we went with a 50, we'd have to make 2 of these units affordable. And then we would be losing, how much are we losing that one unit? About $550 a month. We'd be losing $1,100 a month to get 5 more year amortization. However, in this case, it massively makes up for it because that huge cash flow we get off these units. Anyway, a conversation for another day. Let's just look how this thing breaks down. This is a 3-story 8-plex made up of 2-story unit, 2-story unit. The total cost is $2.9 million in change. The deposit required is 5%, which is $145,000. So just let that sink in. You can own a nearly $3 million apartment building with only $145,000 in the deal. We have the special note here about the 10% affordable and 45-year AM. Project name over here, the liquidity and net worth requirements. So we show that on every single package to make it easy for you to figure out if you can qualify or not. Builder deposit requirements, delivery timeline, which this one is spring 26, so about 1 year from now, and the loan type, that this is a construction draw loan. 2 types of lending with CMHC, which I can explain after when we take some questions. Below that, we already looked at is our kind of unit matrix with our total cash flows, right? So this project will have approximately $209,000 effective gross rent, plus auxiliary income. So the studies we've done, the appraisals we have show that we should be able to generate $100 per month for covered parking, garage parking. And we also show that maybe 1 or 2 of your units is going to have a pet where we can charge an additional $50 per month, giving us about $10,000 per year of additional income. Then we have our expenses. So our expenses come again from commercial underwriter, appraiser, real world example, and property management all mixed together. The last building that we actually had occupy, our final expenses were the real expenses were $75 off from our estimates. So we're pretty good at getting these things lined up. As you know, it's not rocket science to know this stuff when you have CMHC and these underwriters who have data forever on every area of the country. But basically we cover everything. You have your property taxes, your insurance, utilities are zero. These are all individually metered, and being towns, there's no common areas. So it's fully the tenant's responsibility to cover those expenses. You have repairs and maintenance, management and salaries, additional miscellaneous costs, replacement reserve, and vacancy and bad debt. So a couple points on this. We kind of plan for the worst on the expenses. In reality, on a brand new building that has a warranty, and you have security deposits from the tenants, you really shouldn't have any repairs and maintenance for the first couple of years. Because the main cause of repairs on a new building is tenant damage. You have security deposits, you deduct it. They leave holes in the wall when they move out. They don't clean the unit, that kind of stuff. In terms of other costs, this is all inclusive of things like filing your taxes, legal services, other things you may need. These are all just benchmark numbers CMHC wants to see as a percentage of the total income. The reality is you should be able to operate much leaner than this. So in a real world, when you actually paper this out and own the building for a year or two, you should be able to get these expenses maybe down to $46,000, $45,000. But we show the numbers CMHC wants to see. So they're really kind of your worst case expense numbers. The vacancy rate in Granville is sitting just over 1%. It's very low. CMHC wants to see 3. So again, in real life, you should have a lower expense there. Regardless, you end up with a CMHC approved net operating income of about $170,000, $169,258. And then we have our loan calculations. So we have our initial loan, which is 95%, and we also have the CMHC premium, 2.8% premium for the insurance. We're using a 4% interest rate. Right now on a project like this, you'd probably be closing around 3.9%. We typically will use a 4 because even now, and we may have to adjust it upwards slightly over the next couple weeks, obviously, but for the last 6 months, they've been bouncing around in a range where you should be under 4. Regardless, at a 4% interest rate, this is your yearly carrying, which if you add that up is about $137,000, which leaves you with a $32,000 cash flow. The crazy thing about this stuff is the actual returns you're making on your deposits, and it always seems nuts to me to look at this and see a 22% return on cash. Cash on cash is just your cash flow divided by your deposit. It doesn't include principal or anything else. But the reason these are so high is because you're at 5% deposit, right? It's because you get 20 times leverage on that deposit. If you put 10% down on this, which you could if you wanted to, your loan would be smaller, your cash flow would go up, but your actual return would go down because you're putting twice as much deposit. Some people may want to. Nothing's going to stop you if you want to put a bigger deposit. But the fact is, to get your money at 21% cash on cash, where else can you do that? Private lending's 11, 12% if you're lucky. I've seen some guys even at 9 or 10. But here you get that 21% and you own the asset. You're getting the principal. You're getting any appreciation that happens over time. Like, it's a whole other game. Now, most importantly, we have our debt service coverage ratio of 123 in this case. That means there's lots of fat. CMHC and the lender's minimum is 110%. This is sitting at 123. That means if market conditions change, if interest rates go up a little bit, if vacancies rise, if property taxes go up, whatever it is, there's a lot of fat here before you end up in a trouble position. And that's really what matters at the end of the day. Tomorrow, rates could go to 2% and you'll make a shitload of money. Rents could go up 20%. You'll make a shitload of money. That's not what's important. What's important is what happens if things go in the wrong direction for you, right? So having more fat in the deal, having more upside in the deal is protective of your asset over the long run and the down times. And of course, then we also have the cap rate. Now, most commercial investors will look at the cap rate first because a cap rate is just the total cash, the total operating income divided by the price. And the reason that's an important thing is because it's agnostic of your lending or your taxes or anything else. It's just a pure comparison of a building. It can be compared across all markets, all types. So it's a very pure comparison to see, is this actually a good valuation just for the property itself, ignoring CMHC or financing terms or anything like that. And I think if you can get into residential at a cap rate around those ranges, you're looking extremely positive. So this is the most important part of this, is the sensitivity analysis. First of all, we have a rate sensitivity. You know, if things go in your direction, if things don't go in your direction. So worst case here, if you're at 4.5% interest, you're still cash flowing about $28,000, 120 debt service coverage. In fact, we don't run it up that high, but this thing would probably still squeak by even at 5% interest. Why is that important? It just gives you peace of mind because the rates change every day. You haven't bought this yet. You don't know what the rates are tomorrow, the next day, etc., right? This gives you peace of mind that you have lots of fat in this deal whichever way rates go. And if it goes the other way, oh my God, 51,000, you're at 143% debt service coverage. And there's nothing that says that rates couldn't drop half a point. They went up half a point in the last month. They can easily go down half a point as well. It all depends what our GDP numbers say next week, and I'm guessing they're not going to be great. Below that, we also have the rental sensitivity. So what happens if the rents drop as much as 15%? And generally, most of these buildings that are around these kinds of numbers, and we only want buildings around these kinds of numbers, they can support down to 15% rent drops. So if you're losing $1,700 a year, that's what I'm calling breaking even. It's not even $200 a month, right? So that's essentially break even. You can tighten up your replacement reserve, tighten up your repairs and maintenance for a year or two, and be at zero. Realistically, you are not required to carry a replacement reserve, and as I said, you could defer repairs and maintenance or any other things. So if you have a year where rents drop, you could probably squeak by even as close to negative 20% in rents for a year or two and keep the cash flow about breaking even, right? What you need to also consider is that per year you're paying off this much principal from your loan. So even in a case where you were losing $1,800 a year, you're making $18,000 a year in principal payments. So you're still coming out ahead. To actually be at a point where you're losing money overall in a year, you'd have to be sitting around negative 25% on rents. I don't even think Toronto's dropped that much at this point. So I'm not saying anything is impossible, but that's why having these fat debt service coverages, not being sitting right at 1.1 or 1.12 or 1.13, by getting yourself up into the high 119, 120, 121, it provides a lot of safety and security. And that's an important thing. Now, also when you look at this, I see people sometimes getting super in the weeds and being like, well, this one's a 122, 123, this one's a 122.8, it's not as good. You have to remember that all these numbers are multiplied by 20 because you're only putting 5% in the deal. So the margin of error is probably 4 or 5% in a number like this, because if you change the property tax as $50, since it's multiplied by 20x, because you're only putting 5% down, it can move these percentages easily 1 or 2%, a single little change. So you're generally looking at the range, like a 120 is a 122, is a 118. It's like margin of error in polling. You can't look that micro. It's more the overall. You don't want a 110. You want something sitting around 120 for that extra safety. In terms of potential upside over a 5-year period, I will tell you right now, I cannot predict 5 years into the future. 5 years ago, we were sitting locked in our houses, washing our vegetables when we got home from the grocery market. So you can see how much changes in 5 years. When you look at a commercial investment, people generally want to see a 10-year, a 5-year outlook. What's going to happen with my investment? But it is extremely hard to predict asset values, rents, other things over any 5-year period. Real estate is a long game. In the short run, any year could do anything. No one really knows. When you're buying real estate for 1 or 2 years, you're gambling. When you're buying it for a decade, you have pretty solid certainty. So can I tell you that rents are going to rise 5% over the next 5 years? No. Do I believe that over 5 or 10 years, rents will be substantially higher than they are today and the asset value will be higher today? Absolutely. Do I think that it will be higher 5 years from now? Pretty darn sure. But can I tell you that it's going to be 20 or 30% on the nose? No. It could drop next year, and then it could go up the year after that. It's a long-term game. What matters is that in any given year, even if interest rates go up and rents go down, you're not going to end up in a negative cash flow position. And in the good years, you're going to make tons of cash flow, and the whole time you're paying down your mortgage. And over a long enough period of time, that appreciation will come, and you will be able to pull out that money through pari passu financing to go and buy more real estate. And that's really what matters. If you get lucky, you could be up easily $1 million in equity in 5 years. It's happened, guys. Look in Toronto from 2010 to 2020 and from 2020 to 2023. Things were going up 10, 15, 20% a year, right? It doesn't mean it's always going to happen. If you get the right wave, you get all these benefits. If you get the wrong wave, it takes longer, but you'll eventually get that appreciation. What you will always have is that cash flow and that mortgage pay down. Without any appreciation, this building is bringing in $48,000 a year in value to you off your deposits, just off of the cash and the mortgage. And that mortgage amount is always going to increase every year because that's how a blended mortgage works. Just a loan, average that to $50,000 a year. That means over 5 years you're collecting $250,000 in principal and cash flow from your rent. You only put $145,000 in the deal. Show me where you can do something better than that with pretty solid certainty, right? Because sure, maybe when pre-con condos were at their hottest, some people were doubling their deposits in 2 or 3 years. But now look at them. That was pure speculation. This is almost certainty. The mortgage pay down is going to happen every time, and as long as there's not a catastrophic drop in rents, you're getting that cash flow. That's why I buy these. And if the appreciation comes, that's a huge benefit, and that's a huge bonus, and that's where you go, refinance it, pull out the equity, and you buy more when it happens, right? And that's why these things can make so much money. The other thing about this is as of, when was this appraisal done? March 11th, so this is pretty new. We have this thing appraised at $3.15 million. And that's not us going to the appraisal and trying to juice it and push it. That's what the current appraisal is from the appraiser. You're paying $2.9 million. So in theory, you have $250,000 of day one lift in this project by buying it. 250 is like what, 7.5% of the purchase price. So they're going to vary. Some projects will be much closer to their appraised value. Other projects might have 10, 15, 20% potential lift in them. Sometimes it comes down to how much the builder had to pay for the land, what neighborhood they're in, that kind of thing. But we try, on average, to get our buyers 10% lift. That's why we show 10% lift in the first year. It's an average. I don't change it on every single project because I don't always have the appraisals when we put these together. But my goal is to show a buyer 10% on average of equity when they're buying something pre-construction. Why? Because why else would you buy pre-construction? If you're buying a resale building, you're buying it at the appraised value. If you're going to buy a building that's not coming to you for a year, you need to be rewarded for that. Because that's your time. Your money's sitting there not actually earning you money for a year. So we have to reward you for that. And to do that, we make sure there's upside in the appraised value. What does that mean? That means that potentially, assuming that the rents and the interest rates are where we'd like them to be in a year when this building's ready, you could immediately go back to CMHC and try to get your deposits out on that deal because there's upside in the appraised value. So that's where there's potentially huge value. And again, I say potentially because who knows, maybe interest rates at 5% in a year and it's just carrying itself and that's great. You're still carrying. But if the interest rates stay kind of where they are, then you could potentially end up at zero down in this deal by closing. And that's where the real amazing things about this stuff is. So generally what you'll see in our packages, the further out the delivery, the more upside there'll be. In the appraisal, the shorter the timeline, the closer it'll sell to appraised value because you're being de-risked on time. So one last thing I want to show. There's been lots of people running ads for CMHC lately. And this is a random ad I saw the other day on Instagram, and I just took a screenshot of it because there's so many wrong things in this ad. Whether you buy from us or not, or build your own building, or never look at this stuff again, I just want you to be critical of what you see online. So first of all, new program financed by the government of Canada. Well, number one, it's not a new program. It's been around for literally since the 1960s. So I don't think that qualifies as new. But more importantly, the government of Canada does not finance these deals at all. Private banks finance these deals. They are insured by CMHC. And even if they were trying to say CMHC, CMHC is not owned by the government of Canada. It's a crown corporation. It's a separate entity. Second, interest rates, 2.8 to 3.5%. This is how I know you definitely should not buy CMHC from whoever ran this ad. 2.8 to 3.5% is the insurance premium that you get from CMHC depending on how many points you take. So why is that important? Well, number one, there's nowhere on earth you're getting 2.8% right now. Even when rates hit their lowest in March, April, they were nowhere near that. They weren't touching under 3. But number two, that shows to me this person doesn't understand how the program works at all because they confuse the interest rate with an insurance premium. And you can do whatever you want, but I would not be buying multi-million-dollar commercial investments from someone that doesn't understand the difference between an interest rate and an insurance premium. My point is I see a lot of ads with incorrect information. Other things I see is people saying only 5% down. If you read my language through all those slides, I'm very careful to say, in fact they did, only 5% down payment. I never say that. I say as low as or up to 95% financing. There is never a guarantee that you can get only 5% down. Most of our projects hit 5% down. The math works, the numbers work easily, but there's a human factor with CMHC. You get an individual adjudicator. They are a human being. And just like most government bureaucrats, they're a human being that does not always make sense. They can literally say, I have seen it. Appraisal makes sense, numbers make sense, but the loan seems too big, so I'm giving you 93%. Why? Because it just seems too big. Like it happens. It doesn't happen all the time. Most of our deals hit 95, like 90% of them hit 95%. But what I try to tell people is all buyers should be prepared for 90-10 or better. And when you get your 95, you're super happy with us. If you get 94, who cares? You get 93, 92, you're still buying an apartment building with less than 10% down. But if someone tells you that they can guarantee you only 5% down or will always be that, be extremely wary because it does not matter how good the project is. It can be completely arbitrary that CMHC adjudicator just doesn't say yes. I've seen it. You can ask the mortgage brokers. They see it all the time. So just be wary about that kind of stuff. Whether you buy from us, buy from anyone else, really grill them. Make sure they actually understand what they're talking about. These deals are simple to talk about. They're complex to execute on. We have over 100 files going through lenders and CMHC right now. We've stubbed our toe along the way as we learned the process and became experts, but now we have things operating extremely efficiently with the appraisers, with the lenders, with the mortgage brokers. It takes a lot of knowledge, and if people can't even get the basics right, how are they going to help you when a deal comes up short at CMHC or the lender wants to charge you a huge spread or extra fees and stuff like that? So anyway, that's it. The question was, because we have some people online, what is recourse on loans? So as I mentioned, in Canada, we do not have any such thing as no recourse loans. I wish we did. In the United States, they have no recourse loans, which means when you do commercial investing, you pay your deposit and the bank has no holdover on you as a human being. So if you screw up your investment completely, you give them the keys and walk away. In Canada, we always have some recourse. It's basically what we call like a personal guarantee. Now, that may be a full, this is totally at the discretion of the lender. CMHC allows discretionary low recourse, which means it could be as low as 20% or it could be as much as 100%. Completely up to the lender. It might seem counterintuitive, but generally the stronger your borrower profile is, the lower your recourse is. And if you have a very strong profile on the corporate side, they may allow you to only corporate guarantee. So what I mean by that is if you're like a doctor or something or a dentist that has a big corporation with lots of cash flow, they might let you have no personal recourse against the loan. Generally what you'll see is if you're doing a construction loan, they will have 100% recourse during construction. And then on the takeout, when it becomes a regular mortgage for ongoing lending, it might go down to 40 or 20%, depending on who you are. Common misconception about the recourse is that, like, let's say something goes wrong and the project goes into some sort of financial crisis or default. The personal guarantee, the recourse, it's not really designed to recover the money from you. Because in a lot of cases, the loan size might be so big that trying to recover the money from you is like nonsensical. Because if it's a $20 million project and you personally guarantee it, like very few people have that much personal assets. It's all going to be in corporations and stuff. They're obviously also going to go after the building first, which is why it's important to have upside in the appraisals and make sure you have proper equity in that building. They're going to sell the building or take it over, and that should cover it. The reason that they generally have the recourse is it's to avoid fraud or like, if you do some stupid shit, then they can come after you personally for the loan value. In most cases, they're always going to go to the building first. So you would have to have, considering that these buildings can basically break even with rents dropping 20%, you'd have to be in a really bad position to ever end up with that situation. Regardless, when you do personal investment, when you buy a condo under a normal mortgage, you have 100% recourse every single time. So it's not as good as the States where they just YOLO the money, but generally you'll be at between 20 and 40%. And that's totally up to the lender what they give you, and a lot of it has to do with your personal situation. No, so the recourse is contractual. It is not against your it's not physically put on any property, and it's not showing up as a credit mark. So it's just contractual. It's saying you just took a $2 million loan, let's say, it's secured against the building, and you have recourse against it for 20%, which means that if anything ever went wrong, they can also come to you for potentially $400,000 at the maximum. But that is contractual obligation. It's not actually liened or secured against anything you own. Yeah, so CMHC has two types of lending. They always end the same at a mortgage. The difference is that CMHC also offers construction financing. So the advantage of the CMHC construction financing is that since it's backed by CMHC, the construction financing is generally way cheaper than a builder gets from most lenders. It could be 3 or 4% lower interest rate. The big disadvantage of it is that dealing with CMHC is a pain in the ass. They want a lot of paperwork and stuff during construction. So about 60 to 70% of our deals are draw, and about 30, maybe 20% are mortgage only. Some of that is simply timing. If a builder's already started construction on a building, it wouldn't make sense to try and switch the financing in the middle, so that would be a mortgage only. Generally, when you do construction loans, the builder will sell you that building slightly cheaper because you're getting better financing from CMHC than they would get from their own lenders. For me, I personally only do draw loans. The reason is because of one other thing with CMHC. CMHC certificates of insurance are only valid for 6 months. That means that from the day you get your approval, you must take the loan within 6 months. Otherwise, you have to go back, reapply. Challenge with that is, if it's a mortgage only and your building's closing in 12 months, that means that you're literally signing a contract today and sitting on your hands for 6 months because you can't apply to CMHC yet. And the challenge with that is, what if CMHC changes the rules in those 6 months? Or what if your financial situation changes in the 6 months? And to me, that's a very big risk I don't personally like. So by doing a draw loan, you can apply to CMHC right away because you're opening that mortgage immediately for construction. So I think that is, even though there's a little more risk because now it's my financing doing the construction, which some people don't like, I would rather know that I'm approved with CMHC because I'm eligible today. I don't know what's happening in 6 months. So it just gives you a lot more security. It makes the builder feel more comfortable as well because they don't have potentially a project sitting that they build and then the person can't close the deal, and you're going to save a little bit of money. The other big advantage I think of the draw loans is when the bank gives money for construction, they want to make sure it's actually being used for construction, right? Like otherwise, if someone gets $6 million and goes to Venezuela or something, so they hire someone called a quantity surveyor. Quantity surveyor is a third-party consultant that the bank hires, not you, not the lender. You're paying for it, but the bank hires them. That way they're independent. They go to the site before any construction draws are released to the builder, and they verify the work is completed. They are more strict than a building inspector from the city. So the nice thing about it is they will be a total hard ass on your builder to make sure things are built correctly. Like I've seen buildings where they passed inspection and the quantity surveyor wouldn't release the loan because they found defects. So it's kind of nice having a second guy who's a total hard ass checking your building, not just a municipal inspector. So I think that's another benefit as well. There's no right or wrong answer. Some people say, I don't want the risk of it being on my financing, but all CMHC construction draws have to be bonded and insured anyway, so it's kind of de-risked in that sense, right? And we're only working with builders with proven track records, and we make sure the budgets are already approved by the lender and CMHC. They want to see a healthy contingency and interest reserve and stuff. So I personally do the draws. So the question is what type of warranties they offer. Depends on the building. So most of the builders we work with will use Alberta New Home Warranty on their smaller projects. Alberta New Home Warranty is kind of equivalent to like Tarion. Very similar. Slightly different program, but it's similar concept, right? If you want to read all the details of it, you can go on their website and read it. Most of the bigger buildings are just going to be like a private commercial warranty. Usually that's like on a big building, it's like a 1-year bumper to bumper, and then you have all the warranties on the individual supplier's items. It's a little bit separate. But on most of like the 6s, 8s, 10s, it's either Alberta New Home Warranty, or there are other similar warranty programs in Alberta. It's more marketplace. Most of the builders use Alberta New Home Warranty. They also do the same thing, protecting deposits and that kind of stuff, just like Tarion. Asked, is there a ratio for the number of low-income units per complex? Yes. So if you read the online chart, there's 3 levels. You can have 10%, 15%, or 25% affordable, and you get different number of points depending on which one you use. Most of our buildings are 25% affordable because we have no penalty to putting them in the basement, and then you get your 50-year loan. That Granville one, we went with 10% affordable because we have the bigger units, and we go with a 45-year loan, and it actually papers better. We paper it both ways, and it just does better. Is there variable rates? Is it all fixed? No. They only do fixed rate lending. Variable rate is way too risky on a loan of that scale. It might look attractive today, but you can't have that kind of risk when you're talking about a $10 or $20 million loan. They want to know that you're good for that 5 or 10-year period. What is the average appreciation of the properties after construction? If I knew that off the top, if I knew that with 100% certainty, I would be a billionaire already. But as I say, we aim for an average of 10% lift from the appraisals. What happens after that? I don't know. I can't predict the future. I like to think over the long run, property goes up. What is the lender fees and CMHC fees? We didn't get into that detail. CMHC does charge an application fee. It's extremely minor. It's $200 per door. So when you're applying to CMHC, if you have an 8-plex, it's $1,600. It's not really even worth talking about. It's kind of like your lawyer fees. They're so minor. Now, the lender fees we incorporate into our budgets. So it's kind of a weird one because the Granville one, it's all paid for by the builder, so you don't see it as showing anything. But commercial lending, all fees associated with it are the responsibility of the buyer. In residential lending, there are fees. You just don't see them. The bank hides them inside your mortgage. So in commercial lending, builders charge a fee, brokers charge a fee, you have to pay for appraisals, all these other things. What we do in all of our packages is we include a 2.5% buffer in the price to cover all of those fees. Some of the deals, the builder will just pay that. It's built into the price. The builder uses that money because it's going to get put in the mortgage to cover those fees. Other deals, the buyer pays it out of their pocket, and then they sign a rebate agreement with the builder to receive that money back on closing, therefore allowing it to be amortized into the cost. Every pro forma we have will show those details, what's included or what's paid out of pocket. But our goal is either having the builder paying it or rebating you to get those fees rolled in to be financed rather than paying them, basically having them as a capital cost out of pocket. How much is needed to pay till the landlord gets title, including 5% down? So all of these deals are inclusive of all of the carrying costs during construction. So there's something called an interest reserve, which the lender and CMHC calculate based off of your construction budget and timelines and everything else. They add that into the construction budget. So You can think of it like your own loan is paying for itself during construction. You're not paying the interest out of your own pocket. So let's say over construct, and when you see a budget like 2.9 million, that is inclusive of that interest reserve. In that budget, there's probably $300,000 reserved for interest. But now, whether that's shown as an interest reserve or not, that is budgeted in any new construction. When you're buying a condo from Tridel, they're obviously one of their costs is interest and taxes and electricity they have to pay during construction. All of those line items are budgeted. They're not out of pocket. What if the deal firm and CMHC didn't finance? So this is a great question. We pre-qualify all of our deals to ensure that they're compatible and easily exceed the requirements of CMHC, and we pre-qualify all of the buyers. I will not let a buyer sign a contract without meeting with the brokers first and doing a pre-qualification, and we never even let people buy right to their limit. We always want to make sure they have a little bit of excess. So the key is there's no risk on a file being approved. Buildings are approved on a science. It's either they meet the qualifications or they don't. It's the buyer who could fail the qualification if they don't have the net worth and the liquidity. We're pre-qualifying someone with a mortgage broker. If a buyer lies about their liquidity and their banking and all that stuff, that's on them. That's not on us. Like, why would you lie to the mortgage broker? As long as you're honest about your financial situation, there's really no way you can't be approved. The builder shouldn't be on the hook if you take 90 or 120 days and then we find out you don't actually have $200,000 in liquidity. That's on you as a buyer. So if that was the case, you would lose your deposits because it's kind of your fault you're in that position. So the question was basically like, can you always go to 95% loan to value? The answer is 95% loan to value is just the maximum they will do. What actually limits you in most cases is the debt service coverage, because and realistically they kind of go hand in hand, because a building's value is based off of how much income it produces. So there's no way you're going to get some crazy high value if the income isn't there, right? If a building makes enough income that it's worth $3 million, you're not going to get an appraisal at $10 million. It wouldn't make any sense. So generally, you should be able to get to 95% because the income would have to justify an appraisal that would allow you to get to 95% in the first place. But in a situation where the income was short, you would always be limited by the debt service being 1.1 versus getting to 95% financing. If someone doesn't understand what I mean, we can always talk about it more after, but I'm saying you can only mortgage up to the point where you can cover 10% more than your mortgage at the end of the day. So it doesn't matter if you get a huge appraisal, you're always going to be capped by having 10% more net operating income than your loan. Question was, for those online, what happens if you want to sell it in a year? CMHC does not care if you sell the building. The loans are assumable. It's, in fact, as far as I know, the only assumable loans in Canada. Those don't know the term assumable. It means the new buyer can take over your mortgage. What you cannot do is break it off and sell it as individual units, because they're giving you this kick-ass financing. The whole point of that financing was that you build an apartment building with some affordable rentals in it. So if you then like sold those off as individual units, all you did was cheat the system to be a home builder and sell houses. Right? So as long as you sell the building as a whole building, you can sell it anytime you want. You can even assign it during construction. They don't care. As long as the new buyer qualifies and as long as they maintain the requirements with CMHC, which is a 10-year period that you have to keep as an apartment building with that affordable component. After 10 years, you can do anything you want with it. That being said, selling it off as individual units is a silly idea anyway, because even if you make a little bit extra profit per unit, you're triggering capital gains, and now you don't own this asset anymore. And whatever extra profit you made will be eaten by the capital gain tax, 100%. You're way better off to maintain the building, pull out the equity, and go and buy more. Because you make 100, 200K upside on a little 8-plex, cool, what are you going to do next? If you pull that 100, 200K out, you can go buy another 8-plex, and you're going to get a lot more money. But regardless, you can always sell. The new buyer can take over and assume the mortgage. And if there's a differential in price, they can use pari passu to top up and hopefully get to 95% as well. So it's actually advantageous when you're listing these resale, when you tell people that there's a really attractive mortgage with low interest and 50-year amortization, it's a benefit for the new buyer. So I would never sell them. You're better off borrowing against them, which is a tax deduction. But I'm not an accountant. You can always talk to your accountant for more details. But capital gain sucks, basically. Yes, correct. You would have to refinance with CMHC pari passu. That's the only lending they will allow you to do. Most of these certificates of insurance and most of the lenders will actually say you cannot take any other second mortgage behind it. It has to be with CMHC. The question was about the mortgage term. You can do a 5 or 10-year term. The CMHC requirements are 10 years. So that all that means is that for 10 years you have to maintain those affordable units. After that, you can do whatever you want, right? And again, they index the affordability every year, so it's not like it's going to be massively lower over 10 years. So it's not, and again, the affordable right now in Alberta is below the market anyway, so there's no penalty. I think they're saying your focus is in Alberta. My concern is what happened to those projects where there is talk about separation. I always joke about this. First of all, I don't think the separation will happen. If it did happen, I would see that what's really going to happen is Alberta would join the United States, and now you would own a property that just got switched to USD, and I wouldn't think that's such a bad thing. So, I mean, I think you could work out for you, but that's such a speculative thing. I mean, even the French, they've been talking about separating since the 60s. They haven't done it, so we'll see. But I'll move there if they do. After CMHC's November 2024 rule changes on rental achievement holdbacks, how much extra equity or bridge debt for lease up? So the EGI holdbacks are discretionary. We didn't even get into this. Basically, CMHC used to never have what's called a holdback. A holdback means that they can say, okay, if we're going to approve your loan at the terms that you have, we want to see that you actually get the rents on closing that you said you would. And if you don't get those rents, we may reduce your mortgage by the proportional amount, right? Like dollar for dollar. That has been happening substantially in Ontario because Ontario has had decreasing rents. And builders in Ontario have been pushing extremely aggressive pro formas because it's the only way they can make the deals work. I have not seen one holdback deal in Alberta in all of our files. In fact, we just had another COI, another certificate of insurance Tuesday. I literally posted a picture of it all blacked out. Did not have any holdbacks or anything in. So the key to not having holdbacks is to not use outlandish rents. If you're using rents that are within what CMHC wants to see, that are reasonable rents that you can prove are out there in the market, which is what we do, then I have never had a holdback on a file. Could that change in the future? Absolutely. But as of now, we have never seen a holdback. I was talking with our mortgage broker who, outside of us, does hundreds and hundreds of files a year. He's had like 1 or 2 holdbacks across hundreds of files. If there was an issue with a holdback, most of the lenders will work on some sort of bridge solution in the meantime. But right now in Alberta, we're exceeding the rents in our pro formas on most of these deals. Since 20% will be affordable units in the multiplex, will the remaining 80% are hard to rent out? Any taboo to affordable? Yeah, so the great question. And to clarify that, affordable is not, this is exactly what I was talking about before, affordable is not low-income housing. This person online is confusing low-income housing with affordable. You are not renting these affordable units to, let's say, less desirable people. The guy taking your affordable unit could be a CEO making $20 million a year. CMHC does not care who is on the lease. They don't care how much money they make. All they care is that you don't rent it for a penny over $16.65 a month. It is still a market unit. It's just the rent you're allowed to charge. So there's no taboo or cliche or whatever stigma term that you want to use on those units because you're not renting it to like people who are drug addicts or something like that. It's just that you can't go over that rental number. These projects go up incredibly fast because they're simple construction. So I have seen every project we've worked on with the builder, they've all been within like worst case 60 days of their expected date. A lot of people in Ontario are used to things being off by like 2 or 3 years because they're used to concrete buildings in downtown Toronto. When you're building a townhouse that's literally just a wood frame construction or even like a 3 or 4 level wood or steel building, they go up very, very fast. So they're generally like right on budget, on time. The key with these buildings is more that in Edmonton they have 2 seasons. They have winter and construction, as they like to joke. So it really, the biggest time factor is always going to be, can they get the building sealed in before winter? And then if they can't get a building sealed in before winter, then nothing's getting done until the spring. As long as it's sealed in, then they can finish the inside over the winter. So generally, these timings are not really about, like, can they build it fast enough? They time the buildings around that winter construction timeline, because if they can't pour the foundations and seal the building over the summer and the fall, then they can't really start until the next season. So that's the biggest factor. It's not rent control per se. It's that CMHC has an affordable limit for some of the units in your building. They're going to say, if we're going to give you this amazing financing, we want you to give something back. So they're saying that you have to designate, and you can choose whichever ones you want. You have to designate in an 8-plex, 25% would be 2 units. In a 10-plex, it would still be 2, or whatever it is. You have to designate 2 of your units that cannot be rented over that rent, whatever it may be each year. This year, it's $1,665. Next year, it might be $1,700. Whatever it is, it generally never goes down. They usually leave it flat and then raise it, leave it flat, then raise it. But they'll say that Unit 1 and Unit 4 can only be rented at $1,665 this year. And they'll give you a yearly number. Correct. These are all professionally property managed. I still say you because at the end of the day, you're the boss. If you tell the property manager what to do, they listen to you. Yeah, but they're going to take whatever you say. When you say, these ones I want to rent at $2,700, this one I want to rent at $1,665, they'll say, I'll try, boss, I'll go do it, right? And then if they have any issues, they'll let you know. Yeah, so the question was, do I have to follow what I want to rent any unit for? So your own, the market rent units, if you have an 8-plex, you have 2 affordable, you have 6 normal units, you can try to rent the 6 units for whatever you want. You want to put them up for $1 million each, you can do that. The 2 units that you have under the affordable will have to be at 1665 or less. That's the give back you have to make. So it's those 2 units that are designated as your affordable units. You cannot do short-term rental. So CMHC wants to see at least a 6-month lease is their minimum lease. Most people are doing a 12-month. Now, can you get away with it? Probably. Do I recommend that? Absolutely not. Not only will they default your loan, which will be really bad because what are you going to do with this massive, you're going to have to immediately come up with the difference, but they will also ban you from the program for life by personal name. So you can't just hide behind corporations. So it's like, could you make more money doing Airbnb? Probably. But you're going to bite the hand that feeds on a good program and get yourself permanently banned and then possibly default on a $5 million loan but you have no other way to repay on the property. Like, it's going to get bad, right? The nice thing we didn't even talk about, they allow, because obviously there's many buildings in the cities and stuff where they want some ground level retail or they want office space or educational space. Sometimes it's impossible to build an only residential building. It doesn't meet the building code. CMHC allows by value and by square footage up to 20% of the building to be commercial. So what that means is if you have a 10,000 square foot building, theoretically 2,000 square feet of it could be designated to be retail ground level or office space or something else. And also on an appraised value, it has to be 20% or less. Both have to qualify. So we do have buildings where there's ground level retail, and I do really like those because normally, if you're familiar with commercial financing, when you do office or retail, you're generally at 60-40 loan to value, maybe 70-30 if you're lucky. But they're much higher ratio than even a traditional mortgage. With CMHC, they'll do the commercial space at 75% loan to value, the residential's at 95%, and then you blend it, and usually you'll end up with a building where you're at like 9% deposit, but you end up with commercial space, which is extremely attractive because retail prints money. Retail is like the best cash flow machine that exists, but normally the challenge with it is you got to put 30-40% down. So if you can own a whole building where you're getting 20% retail and you're at like 8 or 9% down, it's very attractive. And in a lot of these buildings where we have that, they'll usually even be like a daycare already leasing the retail like ahead of time. Like we have a 30 unit right now with a retail space in the ground and it's already got a 5+5 lease for the daycare. So you already have a tenant in there. You have a 30-unit building with a daycare below. It's like a self-feeding cycle. You'll get higher rents in the building because people can just walk downstairs to drop off their kids. And you know the daycare can feed itself and keep paying you. So and the reason I detoured into that is because in theory, you could have a building where that commercial space is a hotel and you do Airbnb, right? But again, just don't break the rules. I mean, do whatever you want, but if you break the rules, they're going to kick you out. And they will catch you one way or another. Commercial loans have yearly financial reviews. So generally most of these loans, doesn't matter if it's CMHC or any commercial loan, within 4 months of your year end, they're usually going to ask you for your financials to make sure that everything makes sense. And if they see something doesn't make sense, if suddenly your operating income went up like 25% and it's not explainable, they're going to have a lot of questions.